We can start now. Let me share my screen.
Sure.
I hope my screen is visible. Can you please tell me whether my screen is visible or not? Good evening, one and all present here. This is Soumya Pranjal, host for today's session, and today's session is about diving into security pillars in Azure by Deepti Gauri. About Fifth IR, that stands for Fifth Industrial Revolution, we help technologists to share their learning and get opportunities through our partners worldwide. Here you can see how we are growing. We have 241 jobs, 9 upcoming events in next month, 1083 sessions completed till date, 24 courses are available, 367 active members with us, and we have 8633 certification courses are available on 5th IR and 26,538 members. They are few of our master mentor and MVP. We are also an Alibaba Cloud Academy partner. So these are few samples of Alibaba Cloud certifications. We can help you in building your knowledge, digital presence, and helping you in odd hours. When you are looking for jobs through our community, you can get all of this with a single link, that is www.fifthir.com. And for getting certificate, you need to register for this event and then click on claim certificate and provide all the required information, and then you will be asked for a code. Enter the code which I'll share at the end of the session for downloading the certificate, and the certificate would look like this. About Deepti Goguri, she is database administrator, Microsoft certified trainer, associate and expert level certification in data management and analytics. She is co-organizer for Microsoft Data and AI South Florida User Group and Data Platform Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Virtual Group, and volunteer for Data Platform Women in Technology User Group. And for more information, please go through her LinkedIn profile. Thank you so much. Now over to Deepti.
Can you, Soumya, can you monitor all the people trying to join the meeting?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, just give me a minute. I'm going to share my screen. All right. One more minute.
Yes.
I see people joining in. All right. Okay. Let me share my screen now. Share. So Soumya, are you able to
Yes,
see my screen in the
yes,
presentation
it
mode?
is visible.
Just one request that please
Mm-hmm.
monitor the people trying to join the meeting so
Yes,
you
yes,
can
sure,
allow them.
sure, sure.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time on Sunday evening. I know you'll be preparing for tomorrow morning to go to office and stuff, but I really appreciate taking your time to attend this session today. So, what is this session about? My session today for you is about the security in Azure. So if you are new to Azure, this session will be a very good content about security pillars in Azure, because we are going to talk about each and every layer of security. But if you are if you are very familiar with security in Azure, this will become definitely a brush up for you for your knowledge. So I hope you will like this session. So let's get started. A little bit about me, like Soumya mentioned, I'm a database administrator, but apart from what she mentioned, there is some additional information. I have been recognized as a Microsoft Data Platform MVP recently, like couple of months ago, last year in October, I believe. And so I'm really honored to become one of the members, like one of the most professional, most valuable professionals. There are only like around 370 people, I believe, and it is really honor to be one of them. And I'm also a co-organizer for a couple of user groups. I'm a co-organizer for Microsoft Data and AI South Florida user group, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion user group, and recently I joined Data TGIF. So TGIF meaning thank God it's Friday, so you can learn something about data on Friday. And apart from that, I also volunteer for Data Platform Women in Technology user group as well. Um, Apart from my community work and my job, I love doing arts and crafts. It gives me so much peace. It's like a meditation to me. So, regarding this session, if you are shy to ask any questions here, you can contact me on Twitter at dbnuggets, or you can contact me on LinkedIn by search by my name, Deepti Goguri. I'm very active on Twitter and LinkedIn, so it would be an honor to get in touch with you. And apart from that, the last thing that I would like to say here is um, I usually blog about um, I usually blog about SQL Server. I usually blog about fundamentals of Azure, and recently I started a series on security in Azure. It is basically the extension version of this particular session. So if you want to learn more about security, please visit my website, dbnuggets.com. So before beginning, I would like to start with an analogy about a bank robbery. It sounds funny, but trust me, it will serve the purpose. You know, it will link up to our session. So let's say a person want to do a robbery in the bank. He want to grab all the money from the bank. So he decided, and he put a hoodie on him so that nobody can recognize him, a mask on his face, whatnot. So he tried to enter into the bank main door. It can be back door, front door, whatever it is. But before entering into the main door of the bank, he have to pass through some security layers, like the security cameras, which are in place in the parking lot, right? That is the first defense mechanism, like the first layer of security. Because he have a hoodie on him and the mask on his face, let's say he somehow he managed it to enter into the main door, right? And then the next layer that he have to go to grab something from the bank is like, let's say he wanted to enter into a locker room where there are like plenty of locker rooms, but each and every locker have a either the physical key or the digital key. So let's say like he there is a physical key and he broke some of them, but he got very frustrated because he have so much he have so many lockers out there but less amount of time. So he let's say he left that room and he directly want to enter into the main vault room where all the money resides. So even before entering into the main vault room door, you have to first enter by entering the digital lock information to open the door automatically. So let's say he tried words, and as you know, there is a multi-factor authentication setup already in there. So if he try to type two to three times wrong, then an alert will be sent to either the security guard or directly it will send a call to 911. So let's say he tried multiple times and the call obviously went to 911. So police got notified and they are about to come to put him in under the bars. He couldn't even enter into the vault because by the time he tried to open the digital lock, everything was like all these security layers, the multi-factor authentication has actually sent an alert, and he was placed under the bus, but he couldn't even touch the vault, not even the vault door. Forget about the money. So if you see here, there are like multiple defense, in-depth defense mechanisms are set in place for the physical to touch even the physical money, right? In the same way, we have like multiple in-depth defense mechanisms secure in Azure. Like if a bad guy want to touch the data in Azure, because the data is more than money, it contains very sensitive information. Um, so they have to pass through the different defense mechanisms, different layers of security. So when we talk about the security cameras in the parking lot, right, in our analogy, that represents the network security, which is the top level security. That's the first layer of security. And as you dive deep into the security layers, you have access management. Access management is all about like authentication and authorization. Threat protection is all about like if a bad guy or like if a person is trying to log in into Azure from a different location, we will receive that as a threat, right, and get alerted to that. Those sort of things are comes under the threat protection. There is also another in-depth layer of security known as information protection. Information is our data, so data needs to be protected. So we are also going to see how we can actually protect our data itself within our tables. So uh, today in our session we are going to talk about each and every layer in depth. Let's talk about the outer layer of security, which is the network security. So when we talk about the network security, we have four different layers, like four different options available in Azure. From your left side, which shows as a yellow access to Azure services, from left side to right side, as you move, the security increases. The left side is the least secure. As you move right, it is most secure. So let's talk about each of these options. Allow access to Azure services, which is the least secure one. Now, why I say that? Because like you either turn it on or turn it off. Let's say you turned it on. When you turn this option on, anything in Azure can connect, meaning like any services within Azure can connect to your database because it is using internet to connect and it is using public IP address. It is not secure. But outside of Azure cannot connect if you turn this option on. So on-prem servers, they cannot connect. So it has nothing to do with this option, the on-prem servers. So you might be asking me a question like, if it is not secure, why do we even have this option, right? If you turn it on, let's say you're building a database, the new database, and you want to test things out very quickly, like how it is acting, like whether your application is able to connect and make certain testing scenarios. So to make that possible, you don't have to deal with all of these network security, but instead you want to just connect to your database, do some testing quickly, and then drop your database or whatnot. Maybe later you wanted to set all the permissions and like work on the network security. But at the beginning, you're testing few things. You want things to be tested very quickly. That's when this option is useful. The next, so when you turn this option on, allow access to Azure services, and when you do the NS lookup um, from where you're trying to connect to your database, all of the information like control ring information, where is your database actually hosted, you'll be selecting those areas like where you wanted to build your database, right? That information, um, IP address information, like region, controlling information, all of that information is visible. It's not secure. When we talk about the second layer of network security, which is firewall rules, I am 100% sure you already know about firewall rules. Like when we build multiple on-prem servers and we want them to talk to each other, we will be allowing them through firewall rules, right? The connections, we are inbound and outbound rules. We are creating those firewall rules. In the same way, any service that wanted to connect to your Azure SQL database, we can also add manual firewall rules on each of the service trying to connect to your database. It's like general way, like the regular firewall rules that you create on your on-prem servers. It's the same. But here you can also allow your on-prem servers to connect to your Azure. That is not possible with the first option that we talked. And and here still it is using internet, so it have public IP address. And when you do the NS lookup, the control ring information, the region information where your database is hosted, everything is visible. It's still not secure. Let's talk about the virtual network rules, the third option. So here, let's say you have different virtual networks set in place in your Azure. All of these multiple virtual networks are connected through the technologies like VNet to VNet, and there are like certain technologies where you can use to connect your different virtual networks together. And all of these different virtual networks will be connecting to one virtual network. And on that one virtual network, you are going to create the virtual network rule. And that particular virtual network is directly connected to your database. So you just have to have only one virtual network rule that is been created. So when you do the NS lookup, the information like you will get the private IP address within that particular virtual network where you are creating this virtual network rule. But the thing is like still it is public. When you do NS lookup, you still be able to see the region controlling information. It's still, when compared with the left side, it's secure, but it's not so secure like the private link where you will be creating the private endpoint. That's the most secure option, using the private link. So what will happen once you create the private endpoint is like the internet connection will be gone. So you have to connect to your database, any service on-prem or a service in Azure, any service that wanted to connect to your database needs to pass through this private endpoint. There is no other way. So internet is gone. When you do the NS lookup, you will see the private IP address and none of the information will be shown like the way the other option shown, they won't be shown here. So that's the most secure one. Now let's go ahead and see like where we talked about these four options, right? But where do we see those options and how to configure them? Um, let's say I created a security demo SQL server. That's my SQL server name, security demo. If you are not familiar with the page that you are seeing, it's portal.azure.com. You can create an account, you can build your SQL servers. You'll get like around $100 of credit, I believe, for first 30 days. You can go ahead and test it out. So let's say security demo is my SQL server. In the left side your pane, you see the security blade. So underneath the security, click on networking. So we are talking about the network security here. And if you see the bottom of the page, you see the number one, which is like allow Azure services and resources to access this server. That's the least secure option. You can either turn it on or turn it off. Turning it off is the way to go. You need to turn it off because it's not secure, right? Now let's say I turn it on. Any Azure services can connect, like we discussed. Now the second option, if you see the second one, it says like firewall rule. So let's say I want my local computer, my local machine to connect to the Azure SQL database. So I can definitely go ahead and add my local computer IP address here. So let's say I added the IP address here and then I click save. Now I'll go to my local machine and I'll try to connect to the Azure SQL database here. And I will be able to connect because I have added my firewall rule over there. The third option is virtual network, where we will be creating the virtual network rule here. But let's directly go to the fourth option, which is like a private endpoint. So to go to the private endpoint, again, underneath the SQL server, go to the security blade, click on networking, And under the networking, go to the private access, where you can go ahead and create the private endpoint. I'm not going to show you each and every step of how to create the private endpoint because it is damn simple to create. All you have to need is what is your subscription detail, give your subscription ID, and then on which virtual network you want to create this particular private endpoint. So I have created that, right? I have created the security demo private endpoint here. And now I would like to go and connect to the virtual machine, because you know that the private endpoint will be created on a virtual network, right? So I went ahead and I connected to the virtual machine, which is hosted on that particular virtual network. And from there, I try to connect to the Azure SQL database. And I try to connect and I executed this particular query because I would like to know like what is my client net address. So I executed this query and I found an IP address 10.0.0.7. But how do I know this is not the private IP address, and this is sorry, how do I know that this is not public IP address, and how do I know this is a private IP address? I would like to go ahead and double check on it. So what I'll do is I'll go to my portal. I'll connect to the virtual machine, which I built on that particular virtual network where I hosted this private endpoint. And I'll see the IP address of this particular virtual machine. And if you see the highlighted private IP address, it's the same 10.0.0.7. So none of the other information is shown here, which is like very secure. It's always advisable to create the private endpoints. So that's that's all about like network security. That's the top level security. But let's dive deep into the next level of security, which is identity and access management. Identity and access management is all about authentication and authorization. Authentication is about you are trying to logging into portal and you have to prove that you are the authorized person trying to log in. Now in Azure, we have multi-factor authentication setup where you will either receive the code or you will download the authentication app. You have to do the multi-factor authentication to even enter into the Azure. So that's one of the authentication methods. And this authentication is actually available for Azure SQL and multi like managed instance. Both of them will support the SQL authentication as well as Azure Active Directory authentication. So there should be a ID and password to log in, right? So you can also choose only Azure Active Directory authentication only. And like if you are trying to build an Azure SQL database, while building the Azure SQL database, it will ask you whether you have to create the logical server, because logical server is a server where you will try to connect to your Azure database. If you go to the management studio, there should be a way to connect to your Azure SQL database, right? That's the logical server that you will build. So once you build the logical server, while you are building it, you need to provide the SQL ID, SQL authentication ID and password. And while you build that, that particular SQL ID and password will become the server level principal. And if you are building a managed instance, that particular ID and password that you are providing will become a part of the sysadmin server role automatically. Now, when we talk about the authorization, authorization is all about giving access to your resources itself. So both managed instances and Azure SQL have database roles and custom designed roles, as well as you can also do the row level security, which is the principle of least privilege. So when I said like when we build the logical server while we are building the Azure SQL database, the server admin here, the highlighted one, I have given the server admin, the SQL authentication as Deepti. That will actually become the server admin automatically. And let's talk about the role-based access control. So in Azure, we have like automated roles in place, the role-based access control. It's all about like what can and cannot be done to your resources at the subscription level, resource group level, and underneath each of these resource group, you have resources. So what can and cannot be done on these resources? The top three, um, the top three uh, role-based access control that we have, the default ones are owner, contributor, and reader. When you give a resource, the when you give a user the role of an owner, they can do everything. They can read that resource, modify or assign other people, other people as well to access that particular resource. Contributor can do everything, but can do everything like they can read and modify, but all they cannot do is they cannot give other people the permissions to access that particular resource. Reader, as the name says, they can only read this resource. And you can, while giving the user the permissions of these roles, right, they can be inherited. But like when you give it the subscription level, all of the resources under the subscription will have the access. So you need to be very careful while giving the users these roles. So where do I see these roles, right? In order for us to even see those roles, we need to try to give a user the permissions on these resources. So let's say DG test server is my SQL server. And once I click on it, left side of your pane, left side pane, you can go to the access control, which is IAM. Once I click on that, I am trying to add a user so that I can see the role. So click on add role assignment, and that's where I see the default roles. I mean, if you observe, like there are like many built-in roles, but these are the main ones that generally most of the time we use. Owner, contributor, and reader. If you read the description, it says the same. Now let's talk about the differences between the logins, users, and differences between how they are configured on managed instance and Azure SQL database. Like when you build the managed instance, you can build the Azure Active Directory. Like the Azure Active Directory can become the server admin. You can also choose the SQL or Azure Active Directory logins. Just the way you have the logins and users on your on-prem servers, you have the same here within the managed instance. You can create the logins and have the associated users, but also you can also create the contained users. So contained users are the users, they get the ID and password. They can directly get connected to the resources itself, like tables and the database. They do not have to have the login. When we talk about the Azure SQL database, like I said, the login ID will become the server admin, right? So you can have the Azure Active Directory server admin as well. You can create the SQL logins, Azure Active Directory logins, and there are like additional two roles that you have to remember that we have in Azure SQL database, which we don't have in managed instance, are the login manager and DB manager. They have these two additional roles just so we do not have to give them the server admin access. That's the reason we have these two additional roles. And we can have the database users here, like the managed instance. But only thing that you have to remember here is if you want to add any Active Directory logins or SQL logins, the only way that you can add them is to log in as the Azure Active Directory server admin only. You cannot log in as a SQL authentication, ID and password, and you cannot create those users. It have to be Azure Active Directory server admin only. Now let's talk about the data encryption. So this is a this is an another level, in-depth layer of security that we have in Azure. So we have three flavors in it: encryption in transit, encryption at rest, and encryption in use. Encryption in transit, meaning like when your data is being moved from the database to the application and from the application to the database, while the data is being moved, right? It have to be protected. And this particular data, like encryption in transit, is already in place. It's already enabled by default, and you are enforced to choose the TLS version. This encryption in transit is enabled by a technology known as transparent layer security. And as it is enabled by default, all you have to do is go ahead and check which version you are using, whether your application is supported to that version or not. Sorry about that. The next level of security, like the data protections, is encryption at rest. This is all about like the data files, log files, backup files on your drives. They have to be protected all the time while the data is moving in and out of the drives, right? So even this is enabled by default, and it is enabled by transparent data encryption. The third option is encryption in use. So we talked about data moving from database to application, application to database, and data files on the drives. But what about the data protection while it is being processed within the SQL engine? That's when the encryption in use comes in place. And there are technologies, there is a technology known as data enclave, which will make sure your data is being encrypted while it is being processed. So let's talk about the encryption in transit in detail. Like I said, it is automatically enabled and it is enabled by the transparent layer security, and it is enforced all the time for all the connections. All you have to make sure is whether your application, from your application perspective, make sure that your encrypted connection from application is always turned on. And you also have to make sure that the version that you're choosing within the TLS is actually acceptable and supported from your application. Now let's go ahead and see what I am even talking about. Once you open up your portal, Azure portal, again, DG test server is my SQL server, right? So we are talking about the connectivity, the TLS version, and it is underneath the networking blade. So once you click on networking, go to the connectivity. Under the connectivity, you have encryption in transit. That's the first one, right, for the data protection. And once you choose the minimum TLS version, you have all of these versions available. And you have to make sure like one of these versions are like decrypted, like they are not supported anymore. So you need to make sure like what version you are using here is actually supported by your application, and it is always recommended to use the latest version. Encryption at rest is all about the drive protection. Database files and log files, backup files needs to be protected. So how is this actually protected, right? So we use like transparent data encryption, and this transparent data encryption in Azure is handled by the management of the keys. So there are two options. Either you allow Microsoft to take care of all of that for you, which is like Microsoft managed key. These keys are generated, managed by Microsoft. Like once they are expired, they will be automatically renewed. Everything is taken care by Microsoft. But the second option that you have is bring your own key, meaning that you are responsible to build the keys, manage your keys, rotate your keys, and also give the permissions to the users of whether they can access or they cannot access, what kind of access you want to give to the users. Now let's see like where we can actually set this up, right? So security demo, again, it's my SQL server. Underneath the security blade, you see transparent data encryption, because transcript like in data encryption at rest is about transparent data encryption. So now let's go ahead and see the two options that we talked about. Transparent data encryption have like service managed key, customer managed key. The first option, service managed key, is taken care by Microsoft. If you choose that option, you do not have to worry. But when you want to choose the second option, customer managed key, right? It's all about like you are going to create the key. So once I click on that, it's my responsibility to go ahead and build the key, save the key in the key vault, right? So now let's go ahead and see how to actually create the key and place that key in the key vault. So the second option here, once you choose the customer managed key, it will ask you to go ahead and select the key. But currently we do not have any key. So now let's go ahead and build the key first, and then come back here and then choose the key. So in order for us to create the key, first we need to have a place to put those keys, right? That's when Key Vault will come in place. Key Vault is a service provided by Microsoft. It's their product where you can actually build your keys and then um, secure your keys here. To build a key vault, it's very simple. Again, you need like minimum information like where do you want to create this key vault and in location and then what is subscription ID and those sort of things. So you can actually create multiple key vaults. It's not very costly. Um, like for example, let's say you have 10 clients and you don't want all the keys to be placed in one key vault. Please create like a key vault for every single client and then build the keys and put the keys where they belong so that it will be very easy for you to manage them. So let's say we have built the key vault, and now the first thing that I have to do is create the key. So left side your screen, underneath the key vault, underneath the objects, go to the keys, select the key, and then here I have created two keys already, but I will show you how I created it. Very simple. So let's click on one of the key, which is security demo one, the first one. And once I open that up, I will see the current version. Like it's like a code, right? That is internally um, popped up by Microsoft. Like when you want to create any key, it is automatically popped up. You do not have to worry about that. But the options that you need to choose are activation date and the expiration date. So let me go ahead and click on this one to see more details into it. So how did I build this key, right? So if you see the properties, underneath the properties, you have certain key type, RSA key size. Those are the ones automatically they popped up as I create. So that's the internal information. You do not have to worry about that. But like I said, you need to set the activation date and expiration date because you are managing the keys. You are bringing your own key. So you are responsible to make sure you set these things up. And also at the same time, you can also allow this key to either be permitted or not permitted to give the permissions to the users. So underneath the permitted options, right below the screen, you can either like choose encrypt and decrypt. So you are giving the ability to actually assign the other users to actually encrypt and decrypt, but you still have to give the user the permissions, right? So you have the ability to do it here. Um, so that's how I'll be building the key. Now, when you go to the access policies, right? I have enabled that to give the decrypt and encrypt permissions, but I would like to give a user the permissions to actually access this key. So go to the access policies underneath this key vault again, and then once you click on that, you can add the users. I added myself to give the unwrap and wrap key permissions. And then once I did that, once I saved my key, I'll come back again to the transparent data encryption. Again, this is underneath the data protection at rest, right? So it will make sure your data is being protected on disk. So now I created the key. So I'll go ahead and click on select the key, and then I have done that. Like I have selected one of the key, but I would like to change now. Let's say you have created multiple keys and you want to change it here. Go ahead and click on change key and then choose the keyword, because if you have multiple keywords, you need to click on the correct keyword where that key is placed and then click the key. And if you observe here, the last option is version. The version is automatically popped up, but when your key gets expired, it's up to you. You have to come and create the new version. like click on new version, which will create the new version of the key automatically. Click select so that we have selected the key. Now go ahead and click on save. And that's how you will actually protect your data at rest. Now the third one is interesting, which is encryption in use. You need to also make sure your data is being processed properly, and while being processed, your data is still being protected while it is being processed. So, um, so there is a technology known as always encrypted with secure enclaves. So, what you need to remember here is like between the database engine and like the database client, you have a SQL driver, which is known as SQL client driver. It is responsible to encrypt the data, decrypt the data while it is being processed, and encrypt back again. So it is used by the secure enclave. It's a technology. So the database engine will actually delegate the operations on the encrypted data to the enclave where the data can be actually safely decrypted and processed. So on what kind of operations, because we are talking about the queries itself, right? So on what kind of operations the data enclaves can be supported? It can be supported for the various range of queries where you have like operator, the range queries greater than, less than, sorting operations, indexing operations. All of these operations are supported. So let's talk about the dynamic data masking as well. As you know, it is the protection of the data itself within your database and tables. So we are actually encrypting the column data so that nobody can see it, right? Please remember that dynamic data masking has nothing to do with the data encryption on disk, because once you set up the dynamic data masking for your columns, this is not encryption, right? This is not encryption at rest. Your if you put the dynamic data masking and save your like columns, like protect your column, encrypt your columns within the tables, doesn't mean that your drives are not accessible. Like if somebody else come and like bad guy access your drives, they can still see the data. So these two are two different concepts. Please remember that. So to do the dynamic data masking, to enable it, go to the database, SQL database, which is AdventureWorks in my case. I went to the database, and underneath the security, again, we will have the security options available at the server level as well as at the database level. So you will see it in both scenarios. So underneath the security, go to the dynamic data masking, and underneath the dynamic data masking, you can just add the mask. All you need is you need the schema name, table name, and the column name. Once you choose the column, it will automatically provide you the mask function. And once you do that, you can actually um, give the encrypt and decrypt permissions just like the way you give on-prem servers, right? It's the same. It's the same. Now let's talk about the next level, in-depth level of security, which is threat protection and detection. Here we have like different flavors of Azure Defender. So threat protection is done by Azure Defender. You need to turn it on. So underneath the Azure Defender, we have two options: SQL vulnerability assessment and SQL threat detection. So SQL, when we talk about the SQL vulnerability assessment, it is all about, like, let's say you build a Azure SQL database and you turn this option on, SQL vulnerability assessment turn on. So what the Azure does is, like, Azure have certain standards of configuration that they believe that is a standard. And if you build a database, right, and your database is not following those standards of Azure, it will go ahead and capture that information within the SQL vulnerability assessment, and it will provide you the details of how your database needs to be expected to be configured. You can either see the details and take the action, because there are like necessary remediation steps also provided. You can either take the action or you can just ignore based upon your internal policies, right? You might be having certain policies, you might be having certain things that you have to enable, and that might not be the standard within Azure. It's totally fine. You can just go ahead, look into it, and take the action. And the other one is SQL threat detection. It's like a it's like a continuous watchman to your home. Like, who is entering into the home, who is exiting, what's happening around the house, right? So let's say like if somebody else from a different location, unexpected location, is trying to access your Azure SQL database, SQL threat detection will get an alert. Like it will give you the alert where you can actually set up a alert to send you the email. You will immediately receive those updates. That's the SQL threat detection. Any threats, you will be alerted. And SQL auditing comes under one of the threat protection. It's similar to the SQL auditing that you have on-prem. Like, everything will be audited and then give you the information. So Azure Security Center is something like all of these threat protection options that you have, like vulnerability assessment, threat protection, threat detection, SQL auditing information. All of this information will be showcased to you like a dashboard, in the form of a dashboard within the Azure Security Center. Now let's talk about the Azure Defender. Now when you go to the portal.azure.com, once you click on the server, DG test server in my case, again underneath the security blade, go to auditing. And underneath the auditing, you have Microsoft Defender for SQL. Once you turn it on, you need to provide the subscription details and where you want to actually store this data. You can actually create a storage account right at this moment by going ahead and like selecting the storage account. If you don't have one, you will get the option to create one. And you can also send the scan reports to your email. Like if you provide any email address, you can do that. So as I turn it on, give some time, like around like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I gave around like 30 minutes to actually go ahead and assess the details of my database configuration. So, and server configuration. So it will go ahead and um, get that information recommendations. So now I want to view the data. So I went to DG test server at the server level. Underneath the security, I went to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, where I have like certain recommendations and findings. If I want to see more details, at the bottom of the screen, view additional recommendations in Defender for Cloud. I have clicked on that. To see more details, again, it will show all the recommendations. Red indicate like that's where you need to focus more on. Green is like not more, like they are healthy, but if you want to see like how many resources are getting affected, you can see, but red is the one where you need to more focus on. You can also see that information at the database level. Again, those recommendations and findings also be found for the database level as well. Again, underneath the database, go to the Security Blade Microsoft Defender for Cloud. You get 3 findings here in my case. So if I want to see more details into it, I will click on View All Recommendations in Defender for Cloud. Once I click on it, I can go ahead and see the vulnerability assessment findings for my database. So it have provided certain IDs over there, right? So those are internally standards of Azure, but it is showing something like severity right side your screen. It is showing high severity and low severity. So I would like to see the first one. First one says database owners are as expected. But if it is as expected, why did I even see the severity as high? Let me go ahead and click on it and see more details into it. So once I clicked on it, it says like there are like multiple owners, right? You just go ahead and delete if you have any unnecessary database owners. But here in my environment, in my current environment, let's say, I have an internal policy that I need to have multiple owners, and this is totally fine. So you can add that as a baseline, or you can actually remove that as a baseline. You can actually go ahead and directly take the recommendation, the remediation script, and you can execute to remove the users as well. It's totally up to you. Now let's talk about the auditing and how we can actually view the audit data in detail. Now, auditing is actually enabled by default at the server level. So once it is enabled, you need to make sure like where your data is being stored. Um, like I would like to go ahead and create a default workspace, which will store in a default workspace. Um, and you can also check the last option here, enable auditing for Microsoft support operations. This is really recommended to enable it, because if you open up any tickets with Microsoft, they need to have the ability to access your logs. If you turn it off, they will not have access to your logs. So it is always recommended to turn it on. So once I turn it on, everything is in place. Now, how do I view the auditing logs, right? So underneath the Adventure Works database, I would like to go to the security. Underneath the auditing, I would like to view the audit logs. Click on view audit logs, and I would like to see it in a dashboard. So click on the dashboard, which will give you the overview in the form of the dashboard. Now here you see circle as well as a bar graph. Now the circle is regarding the data governance. Once you enable the data governance, all of that information will be also shown in your audit logs. So we are going to talk about the data governance in the coming slide, because that is one of the security layer as well, the information security layer. But now let's focus on the like audit logs, right? The bar graph. So click on that Azure SQL Security Insights, and which shows like audit distribution. And if you see the action name on the highlighted one, you see batch completed, RPC completed. Those are the generic events, auditing events. Click on that to see more details. Here you will have the query editor where you can even edit the query. You can also look like all of the all of the details, like what queries have accessed, and all the audit details that you get on like the way you get in on-prem, who accessed what. Now let's talk about the data governance, the last layer of security, which comes under the data classification. So why I say the data classification is because we can actually use the data governance to classify our column data. So it's very easy and simple to actually classify your data. So in my demo, I'm using AdventureWorks database. Underneath the security, again, go to data discovery and classification. So what you can do here is you can actually, if you have like sensitive information, like for example, SSN, date of birth, whatnot, you can actually classify that particular column data as sensitive based upon the sensitive level. Whether it is highly confidential or low confidential, you can actually um, put a label on your columns. So why do we have to do that, right? So this is again comes under the uh, auditing. You can actually audit the data. Like for example, let's say you have given the label for your SSN column as a highly confidential, and then you set it up. Then the auditing, it will start auditing your column, these columns where you have placed the sensitive label. And if somebody has accessed it, you will see those details in your audit report as well. So, which is cool, because otherwise, how do you know? How do you filter that out, right? So, very simple. You need the schema name, table name, column name, and once you click on the column, it will ask you like what kind of information type, underneath which information type you want to place this in, and give the sensitive label, and that's you're done. And now you can go ahead and see your audit report again. After some time, I tried accessing the sensitive label to see to see the report like this. So I went to auditing again underneath the database. I went to audit records. I clicked. You can see like how many number of queries have actually accessed the confidential data. And if you can click on the queries, once you click on that, you will have like again the query editor is shown up, and you can actually find what exact query and which user has run, from where it has run. Again, this is the audit information. Just like the other audit details, you will see the exact audit information. You can filter it out. You can edit the code as well to give the details. Now, we covered all of the security layers in Azure, but I would like to say that if you would like to go more in depth in this security layer, you can access my website, dbanuggets.com, and go to the category Azure. Underneath the Azure category, you will have all like the extended version of this particular session. But you also have the other resources like um, data exposed, I believe, in on YouTube. Anna Hoffman has actually interviewed multiple product team from Microsoft, the security product team. They have provided like they have given like in-depth details of like what is security and how each of the layer will be actually work behind the scenes. Like they are like seven videos, I believe, and each of them is like 1.5 hours. Like I have like this session is like a curated version, I can say. I have learned a lot from those resources. I have followed all of them to prepare this presentation for you. So if you'd like to go more in depth, you can follow these resources. And I would like to thank Gavaskar one more time, and thank you, Soumya, for moderating this session. And if you'd like to contact me, LinkedIn is a place, Twitter is a place if you have a Twitter account, and you can see my website if you'd like to. And I would like to thank everyone one more time for attending this session. I hope it is at least like helpful to you.
Thank you so much, Deepti, for a great session, and thanks to everyone who joined. Let me share my screen once again for the certificate code.
Sure. And Soumya, can I know the
Yes.
count of our session today? How many people has actually the maximum count?
Okay, let me check. The maximum people joined, the number was 25, 26, like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, okay, let me share my screen. This is the certificate. So you all can use this code for downloading the certificate. It might take a few days to get it once we upload the recording of the session, and then you can download the certificate with using this code. And thank you so much again.
You can also actually share that certificate on LinkedIn. You can tag me by my name.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel
sure,
happy.
sure.
I'll feel really happy about it. Like if the audiences can tag me, I feel it shows up to me, and then I feel nice. Somebody has actually gained some knowledge from this content.
Yes, yes. Participants, please download the certificate after like 2 to 3 days. You will get it, and please share on LinkedIn. Okay. Okay. Once again, thank you so much, Deepti.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, and thank you everyone. Um, Thank you, Narendra. Thank you, Murali. Oh, okay. Uh, do I have to stay or can I leave now?
Anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Deva. Thank you, Sampath. Thank you all. Thank you, Hari. Thank you, AK. Again, please connect me on LinkedIn. I mean, I have new sessions coming up. I will be presenting at different user groups. Everything is free. You can also register for those events. Like as I prepare them, I will be sharing the information on LinkedIn. So if you'd like to connect to me on LinkedIn, that should be good.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.